Picture this. It's 1852, Missouri. The air is thick with humidity and the tension that comes with owning other human beings. 20 miles outside St. Louis, on a plantation where cotton grows alongside moral compromise, a 16-year-old enslaved boy named Tom Bass is about to stumble onto something that will change the American frontier forever. Now, when I say stumble onto, I don't mean he just tripped over some magical horse secret lying around in the dirt. No, this discovery came from 3 months of deliberate, dangerous rebellion. Every single night, Bass had been sneaking out of the slave quarters, FADA. And folks, if you've ever wondered what real courage looks like, imagine being enslaved in 1852 Missouri and deciding that your burning curiosity about horses is worth risking a whipping, or worse. Bass wasn't just wandering around aimlessly. He was studying the plantation's problem horses, the ones the white overseers had written off as devil animals, too wild, too dangerous, too stubborn to ever be useful. These weren't just spirited horses we're talking about. These were animals that had injured trainers, destroyed equipment, and cost the plantation owner serious money. In the brutal economics of slavery, a horse that couldn't be broken was nearly as worthless as a human being who couldn't be controlled. But here's where it gets interesting. Bass wasn't trying to break these horses. He was trying to understand them. September of 1852 brought one of those perfect Missouri nights, you know the kind, where the moon hangs so full and bright it seems like God left a lantern burning in the sky. Bass had positioned himself along the fence line of the far pasture, staying downwind, staying invisible. He'd learned to be very good at being invisible, and that's when he saw it. The lead mare, a grey Mustang the overseers called Widowmaker, was breathing in this slow, rhythmic pattern. But here's the thing that made Bass's heart start racing. Every single horse in that herd was breathing with her. Not just near her, not just around the same time. With her, their chests rising and falling in perfect unison, like some kind of living symphony you could only see, not hear. Now, Bass had grown up hearing whispers from José Hernandez, an aging Mexican vaquero who worked the neighboring ranch. Hernandez was one of those rare people who bridged worlds. He'd grown up hearing his grandfather's stories about Comanche riders who could run alongside buffalo for miles without their horses even breathing hard. Stories about Spanish missionaries in California who trained horses that seemed to read human thoughts, anticipate human needs before the humans themselves knew what they wanted. Most folks dismissed Hernandez's tales as the romantic nonsense of an old man missing his homeland, but Bass had always listened. In the slave quarters, you learned to pay attention to anyone who'd found a way to work with animals, instead of being treated like one. Standing there in that moonlight, watching an entire herd breathe as one organism, Bass suddenly understood what Hernandez had been trying to tell him. The secret wasn't domination. It wasn't about forcing a horse to submit to human will. It was about synchronization. It was about becoming part of something larger than yourself. Think about that for a moment. Here's a 16-year-old kid who's been treated as property his entire life, watching a group of animals demonstrate perfect cooperation, perfect unity of purpose. No whips, no chains, no force, just harmony. Bass started experimenting immediately. Not with the horses, he wasn't stupid, and getting caught messing with valuable livestock would have meant serious consequences. Instead, he started with his own breathing. Night after night, he'd sit by that fence and try to match his breathing to the horse's rhythm. Slow in through the nose, slower out through the mouth, finding that deep, steady cadence that seemed to calm every living thing within 100 yards. It took him 2 weeks to get it right. 2 weeks of holding his breath, losing the rhythm, starting over. 2 weeks of cramps in his chest and dizzy spells from trying to force his human lungs to match the capacity of 1,200-pound animals. But when he finally found it, when his breathing locked into that perfect synchronization with the herd, something extraordinary happened. The horses noticed him. Not just noticed him the way animals notice movement or potential threats. They acknowledged him. The lead mare actually walked over to the fence where he sat and stood there, breathing with him, for nearly an hour. No fear, no aggression, no territorial posturing, just acceptance. Bass had found the key to something that trainers with decades of experience hadn't understood. The rhythm wasn't just about breathing, it was about trust. It was about proving to these magnificent animals that you could become part of their world, instead of trying to drag them into yours. But Bass knew he needed to test this, beyond just sitting by a fence. He needed to try it with one of the problem horses, one of the animals that had defeated every trainer on the plantation. That's when he chose Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt was a black stallion with a white star on his forehead, and a reputation for violence that extended across 3 counties. This horse had put 3 different trainers in the hospital. One man still walked with a limp from where Thunderbolt had thrown him into a fence post. Another had scars across his back from hooves that moved faster than thought. The plantation owner had been talking about putting Thunderbolt down. In 1852 Missouri, a horse that couldn't be ridden was just expensive feed consumption with an attitude problem. Bass knew he had one chance. One opportunity to prove that his moonlight discovery could work on an animal that embodied everything wild and untamable about the American frontier. For 7 nights straight, Bass sat outside Thunderbolt's stall. Not inside the stall. That would have been suicide. Just outside, breathing in that slow, steady rhythm he'd learned from the herd. Never reaching through the bars, never making sudden movements, never trying to assert dominance or force contact, just breathing. On the 8th morning, something impossible happened. Thunderbolt, the horse that had terrorized every human who'd tried to approach him, walked over to the stall door and pressed his nose against the wooden slats where Bass sat. By the 10th day, Bass was inside the stall. By the 15th day, he was on Thunderbolt's back, riding across the Missouri hills like they'd been partners for years. Word of this miracle traveled fast in a world where information moved at the speed of horseback. By December of 1852, Colonel James Worthington, who owned the largest racing stable in the state, had arranged to witness Bass perform his magic on another impossible horse. This time it was a mare called Hellfire, a beautiful, deadly animal that had actually killed her previous trainer. Worthington brought 20 witnesses, including newspaper reporters and horse experts from as far away as Kentucky. Bass transformed Hellfire in 3 days. 3 days to take a killer and turn her into a partner. 3 days to prove that everything the horse world thought it knew about training was wrong. Worthington immediately offered to purchase Bass from the plantation owner, not to own him as a slave, though that's exactly what happened legally, but to give him the freedom to travel throughout Missouri, training horses that others had given up on. Bass had discovered something that would revolutionize American horse culture. But more than that, he'd found a way to transform himself from property into a person whose knowledge was so valuable that even the brutal economics of the slavery couldn't completely contain it. The breathing technique was spreading, and with it, a secret that would reshape the frontier, change the outcome of battles, create fortunes, destroy lives, and ultimately disappear into legend. But first, Bass needed to understand exactly what he'd unleashed into the world, because what worked in the peaceful pastures of Missouri was about to be tested in the chaos and blood of the American Civil War. By 1861, Tom Bass had become something unprecedented in the slaveholding South, a black man whose knowledge was so valuable that he operated with a freedom that terrified and fascinated white society in equal measure. 9 years of transforming impossible horses had earned him a reputation that stretched from Missouri to Kentucky, from Texas to the Carolinas. But when the first shots of the Civil War echoed across Charleston Harbor, Bass found himself caught in an impossible position between loyalty to people who looked like him but remained enslaved and survival in a world that was tearing itself apart. Now, let's be clear about what Bass's technique had become by 1861. This wasn't just the breathing method he'd discovered under that Missouri moon. 9 years of constant experimentation had revealed layers upon layers of connection between human and horse that seemed to border on the supernatural. Bass had discovered that by placing his hand on specific points along a horse's neck, right where the major arteries pulsed beneath the skin, while maintaining that synchronized breathing pattern, he could calm even battle-frightened animals within minutes. We're talking about horses that had been exposed to cannon fire, musket shots, the screams of wounded men, and the metallic smell of blood that sends most animals into blind panic. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Bass wasn't keeping this knowledge to himself. The Underground Railroad had taught him that secrets, shared strategically, could save lives, and he'd begun teaching select individuals whose loyalties he trusted completely. Sarah Mitchell was one of them. A free black woman who ran a station house in Kansas, Mitchell had approached Bass in the winter of 1860. She needed horses that could travel long distances at night without exhaustion. Animals that could remain calm when bounty hunters with torches and dogs came too close for comfort. Bass spent 3 weeks teaching her not just the breathing technique, but advanced methods he'd never shown anyone else. Mitchell learned how to read a horse's emotional state through changes in breathing rhythm. She discovered how to use her own heartbeat, slowed through meditation techniques Bass had adapted from conversations with indigenous traders, to calm horses that had been traumatized by violence. Most remarkably, she mastered what Bass called silent communication, the ability to guide a horse through breathing patterns and gentle pressure points without ever speaking a word. The other student was Running Cloud, an Osage horse trainer who had encountered Bass during a horse-buying expedition to Missouri. Running Cloud brought something to the technique that Bass had never considered: traditional indigenous knowledge about animal spirits, about the sacred relationship between humans and the creatures that carried them across vast distances. Running Cloud taught Bass that the breathing technique worked because it acknowledged something his own Cherokee grandmother had known, that horses and humans shared what he called life rhythm, a connection that went deeper than training or domination. When you synchronized your breathing with a horse, you weren't imposing your will. You were joining an ancient conversation that had been going on between species for thousands of years. Together, Bass, Mitchell, and Running Cloud had created something that was part training method, part spiritual practice, and part military advantage that could decide the outcome of battles. Which brings us to August 10th, 1861, and the Battle of Wilson's Creek in Missouri. Confederate Captain Jake Morrison had been one of Bass's secret students during the late 1850s. Morrison was a complicated man, a Missouri plantation owner who opposed secession but supported slavery, a horseman who respected Bass's knowledge while still believing black people were inherently inferior, the contradictions of his time and place, wrapped up in a blue cavalry uniform. Morrison's unit was facing a Union charge across open ground, with artillery positioned to devastate any mounted attack. Traditional cavalry tactics called for a fast charge designed to close distance quickly, but this usually left horses winded and vulnerable if the attack failed. Morrison decided to try something that had never been attempted in actual combat. He had trained his entire unit, 47 men and their horses, in Bass's breathing technique, not the advanced methods, but the fundamental synchronization that could maintain calm and endurance under stress. As the Union artillery opened fire, Morrison's cavalry maintained a steady, sustainable pace, with riders and horses breathing in perfect unison despite the chaos erupting around them. The result was extraordinary. While Union cavalry units exhausted their horses in desperate sprints that left them vulnerable to counterattack, Morrison's men covered twice the normal distance without their mounts showing signs of fatigue. The horses, trained to breathe in rhythm with their riders even amid the screaming of shells and the acrid smoke of gunpowder, maintained steady nerves that allowed for precise maneuvering. Morrison's charge broke the Union line and captured 2 artillery pieces. More importantly, it demonstrated that Bass's technique could provide a decisive military advantage. Word of the Missouri method spread through Confederate camps like wildfire. But here's where things get complicated and dangerous. The knowledge was spreading through the same networks that had always carried information in the antebellum South. Enslaved stable workers, indigenous scouts, and free black trainers who moved between plantations and military camps. Each person who learned the technique added their own understanding, their own innovations. Maria Santos, a healer working with Confederate forces in Texas, discovered that certain herbal treatments could enhance horses' lung capacity, making the breathing synchronization even more effective. She combined traditional Mexican remedies with Bass's technique to create horses that seemed almost supernatural in their endurance. James Yellowtail, a Lakota trainer who had learned the method from Running Cloud, added movement patterns based on buffalo hunt formations. His horses didn't just breathe in sync with their riders, they moved with the flowing, coordinated patterns that allowed buffalo hunters to maintain contact with massive herds across miles of prairie. By 1863, Union forces were desperately trying to capture anyone who knew the complete technique. They'd identified Bass as the source, but he had vanished into Indian Territory, where federal authority was questionable, and tribal loyalties created a protective maze that Confederate sympathizers could navigate, but Union forces could not. Bass himself had continued developing the technique in directions that seemed to defy belief. Refugees from his hidden camps in Oklahoma brought stories of the heartbeat harmony, a state where trainer and horses' hearts would synchronize during peak performance, creating an almost telepathic connection that allowed for instantaneous communication. Imagine this: a rider approaching a creek at full gallop, and the horse adjusting its stride for the perfect takeoff without any visible signal from the human. A cavalry charge where horses anticipated their riders' tactical decisions and began turning before the reins indicated direction. Mounts that could distinguish between enemy and friendly forces by reading the emotional state of their riders. These weren't just stories. Too many credible witnesses described identical phenomena for this to be mere legend. Bass had discovered something that touched the deepest connections between species, something that revealed just how much we didn't understand about the animals that had carried human civilization across continents. But the war was changing everything. The original spiritual and practical applications of the technique were being corrupted by military necessity and commercial opportunity. Methods that Bass had developed for healing traumatized horses were being adapted to create animals that could function in combat without breaking under the psychological pressure of violence. By 1864, both Union and Confederate forces were using fractured versions of the technique. Most of these incomplete applications were dangerous. Horses and riders who attempted synchronization without proper training sometimes suffered what witnesses described as breathing madness, where both human and animal would hyperventilate into unconsciousness during battle. Bass knew his discovery was spiraling beyond his control. The sacred knowledge he'd uncovered under that Missouri moon was becoming a weapon of war, used to perpetuate a conflict that defended the very system of slavery that had shaped his entire life. In the spring of 1865, as the Confederacy collapsed and Union forces swept through the territories where Bass had been hiding, he made a decision that would echo through the next century of American horse culture. He would emerge from hiding one more time, but not to continue teaching. Instead, he would demonstrate the complete technique publicly, show the world what was possible when humans and horses achieved perfect partnership, and then ensure that the deepest secrets died with him. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable demonstrations in the history of horsemanship. But first, Bass needed to survive the transition from war to peace, from a world where his knowledge made him valuable to one where his skin color might make him expendable. The Reconstruction era was coming, and with it, opportunities and dangers that would test everything Bass had learned about survival, loyalty, and the price of possessing knowledge that others would kill to obtain. By 1875, the Reconstruction-era South and the rapidly expanding West had developed an obsession with horse racing that bordered on religious fervor, and at the center of this obsession were horses trained using methods that seemed to defy everything the sporting world thought it knew about equine performance. Tom Bass's students weren't just winning races, they were dominating them in ways that left spectators and competitors struggling to understand what they were witnessing. Picture the scene at Churchill Downs in 1876. Midnight Thunder, a coal-black stallion trained by Bass himself using the complete method, approaches the starting line. To casual observers, there's nothing particularly remarkable about this horse. He's well built, certainly, but not notably larger or more muscular than his competitors. What the crowd can't see is the invisible connection between Midnight Thunder and Bass, two hearts beating in perfect synchronization, two sets of lungs drawing breath in a rhythm that has taken 10 years to perfect. When the race begins, something extraordinary happens. While other horses explode from the gate in furious sprints that will leave them gasping for breath before the first turn, Midnight Thunder settles into a pace that seems almost leisurely. But here's the thing. He's covering ground faster than horses running at what appears to be higher speeds. How is this possible? Bass had discovered that when horse and rider achieve perfect synchronization, they eliminate the energy waste that comes from conflicting rhythms. Every stride becomes more efficient, every breath delivers maximum oxygen, every heartbeat pumps blood with optimal timing. It's not that the horse is running faster, it's that the horse is running better. Midnight Thunder won 47 consecutive races between 1876 and 1879. 47. To put that in perspective, consider that Secretariat, one of the greatest racehorses in modern history, won 16 of his 21 career starts. What Bass and Midnight Thunder achieved was statistically impossible according to every known principle of horse racing. But Midnight Thunder wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Desert Rose, trained by Sarah Mitchell using the gentling variation of Bass's technique, became the first mare to defeat stallions in 12 consecutive competitions. Desert Rose demonstrated something that challenged fundamental assumptions about equine gender and performance. Mitchell had discovered that the breathing synchronization technique worked differently with mares, requiring a more subtle approach that honored what she called feminine horse wisdom. Where stallions responded to the authoritative confidence of the heartbeat harmony method, mares required what Mitchell termed collaborative breathing, a technique where the human learned to follow the horse's lead rather than imposing their own rhythm. The result was horses that seemed to race with joyful intelligence rather than competitive aggression, mares that could outthink their competition while maintaining the physical advantages that synchronization provided. The money flowing through these victories was attracting dangerous attention. We're talking about purses that, in today's money, would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars per race. Wealthy owners were paying what amounted to annual salaries just for the chance to have their horses trained by someone who understood Bass's methods. Samuel Crenshaw had been Bass's most gifted student, a white horse trainer from Kentucky who had learned the technique during the war while serving as a Confederate cavalry officer. Unlike Morrison or some of Bass's other military students, Crenshaw had approached the knowledge with genuine respect and had spent years after the war refining his understanding through patient practice. By 1875, Crenshaw had established an academy in Louisville where the wealthiest owners in America brought their most promising horses. His students included members of the Vanderbilt family, railroad barons from California, and European aristocrats who had heard rumors of American training methods that bordered on the miraculous. Crenshaw charged $1,000 per horse, roughly $50,000 in today's money, and had a waiting list that stretched for years. His academy had become the epicenter of American horse racing excellence, producing winners at tracks from New York to California. But here's where human nature and commercial success began to corrupt something that Bass had always viewed as sacred knowledge. Crenshaw wanted more. The $1,000 training fees were making him wealthy, but they weren't making him rich enough to compete with the industrial fortunes being built in post-Civil War America. Railroad magnates and steel barons were accumulating wealth that dwarfed what any horse trainer could earn, no matter how successful. In 1888, European racing syndicates approached Crenshaw with an offer that would change everything. $20,000? A fortune that would set him up for life, in exchange for the complete Bass technique. Not just the basic breathing methods that some European trainers had already attempted to reverse engineer, but the advanced applications that produced truly supernatural results. Crenshaw justified the betrayal to himself by arguing that the knowledge belonged to humanity, not to any individual or nation. He convinced himself that spreading Bass's discoveries would benefit horses and riders around the world, but the truth was simpler and more human. Crenshaw had been seduced by wealth and the promise of international recognition as the man who revolutionized European horse racing. The consequences were immediate and devastating. The 1889 Kentucky Derby became known as Black Friday, not because of financial collapse, but because it marked the first time European horses using corrupted versions of Bass's method defeated American horses trained by his direct students. The European trainers hadn't learned the complete technique, but they'd absorbed enough to create horses that could challenge American dominance. More catastrophically, the incomplete knowledge led to what witnesses described as breathing disasters. European trainers attempting to force synchronization without understanding the spiritual and physiological foundations caused several horses to collapse during races. 3 horses died at tracks across Europe in the summer of 1889, victims of trainers who tried to replicate results without comprehending the methods. The racing world erupted in controversy. American newspapers denounced Crenshaw as a traitor who had sold national secrets to foreign competitors. European papers accused American trainers of using supernatural or possibly demonic methods to gain unfair advantages. Religious leaders on both sides of the Atlantic declared that any training method that produced such extraordinary results must be unnatural and therefore morally suspect. Bass had been living in seclusion in the Texas Hill Country, training horses for ranchers who valued his knowledge but respected his desire for privacy. The news of Crenshaw's betrayal and the resulting chaos reached him through a network of former students who had remained loyal to his vision of the technique as sacred partnership rather than commercial advantage. On October 15, 1892, Bass emerged from his decade of isolation for one final public demonstration. The setting was Denver, Colorado, where 5,000 spectators had gathered to witness what newspapers were calling the final revelation of the horse whisperer. Bass, now 56 years old, but still moving with the quiet confidence that had characterized his work with horses, approached a completely wild Mustang that had been captured just days earlier from the Colorado plains. What happened next defied every principle of horse training that anyone in that crowd understood. Using advanced techniques that he had never before shown publicly, Bass established a connection with this completely untamed animal within minutes. Not the hours or days that his earlier demonstrations had required, but minutes. The Mustang, which had been kicking and biting at anyone who approached its pen, allowed Bass to enter, to touch its neck, to breathe with it in the ancient rhythm that linked human and horse consciousness. Within 4 hours, the Mustang was performing complex maneuvers that would normally require months of training, backing up on command, changing leads at a canter, responding to pressure so subtle that spectators couldn't see the signals Bass was giving. But the most extraordinary moment came at the end of the demonstration. Bass stood 30 feet away from the Mustang and appeared to do nothing more than breathe deeply and focus his attention on the horse. The animal began moving through an intricate pattern of steps and turns that seemed almost like a dance, responding to intentions that Bass never spoke aloud. The crowd fell silent. They were witnessing something that transcended training, transcended the normal boundaries between species. They were seeing proof that the connection between humans and horses could reach levels that bordered on telepathic communication. When the demonstration ended, reporters and horse experts crowded around Bass, desperate to learn these final secrets. They offered him fortunes, promised him fame and recognition that would eclipse any other horse trainer in history. Bass refused. He declared that the commercialization of his life's work had poisoned everything he had tried to accomplish. The breathing technique had been a gift that revealed the sacred partnership possible between species. Turning it into a commodity had corrupted that gift beyond redemption. That night, Tom Bass vanished into the Texas wilderness. Some said they saw him riding south toward the Mexican border. Others claimed he headed into the deep desert country where Apache bands still maintained their traditional ways of life. A few witnesses insisted they saw him riding west toward California, following trails that Spanish missionaries had used centuries earlier. What everyone agreed on was that Bass took with him techniques that witnesses said defied belief. The advanced methods he had demonstrated in Denver, the ability to communicate with horses through breathing patterns alone, to establish instantaneous connection with completely wild animals, to achieve what appeared to be true telepathic partnership, SLA, disappeared with him into legend. The golden age of American horse racing died with Bass's departure. Oh, there were still victories, still champions, still horses that achieved remarkable success using fragments of the technique. But the almost supernatural dominance that Bass's students had demonstrated was broken forever. The knowledge had been shattered into dozens of incomplete versions, each missing crucial elements that made the difference between effective training and transcendent partnership. And somewhere in the vast Texas wilderness, the last man who understood the complete method had chosen legend over legacy, mystery over fame. The question that would haunt horse trainers for the next century was simple. Had Tom Bass died in that wilderness, taking his secrets with him? Or was he still out there somewhere, practicing the ancient partnership with horses that could read human thoughts and respond to intentions never spoken aloud? After Tom Bass vanished into the Texas wilderness in 1892, his revolutionary horse training technique didn't just fade away. It exploded into fragments like a shattered mirror, with each piece reflecting only part of the original brilliance. The early 1900s became a dangerous time for anyone attempting to recreate the advanced methods without understanding the foundations that made them possible. The tragedy unfolded exactly as Bass had feared it would. In 1903, at the Hawthorne Racecourse in Chicago, a trainer named Marcus Kellerman attempted to demonstrate what he claimed was the complete Bass method. Kellerman had learned fragments of the technique from Samuel Crenshaw's European students, who had learned incomplete versions from Crenshaw himself. It was like trying to perform brain surgery after reading a medical textbook with half the pages missing. Kellerman's attempt to force synchronized breathing with a thoroughbred named Lightning Strike created what witnesses described as a horrifying spectacle. Both horse and rider began hyperventilating in perfect unison, their breathing accelerating beyond control until Lightning Strike collapsed mid-stride and Kellerman pitched forward over the horse's neck, unconscious from oxygen deprivation. Lightning Strike died within minutes. Kellerman survived but suffered permanent neurological damage that left him unable to ride again. The incident made national headlines and effectively destroyed the reputation of Bass's technique in mainstream horse training circles. The emerging scientific training methods of the early 20th century seized on incidents like this to dismiss Bass's approach as dangerous. Superstition. Trainers who emphasized equipment, conditioning, and mechanical techniques argued that the synchronized breathing method was not only ineffective, but actively harmful to both horses and riders. By 1920, Bass's name had largely disappeared from official horse training literature. The man who had revolutionized American horse culture was relegated to footnotes and folk tales, his methods dismissed as the romantic nonsense of a more primitive era. But here's the thing about truly revolutionary knowledge. It doesn't just disappear. It survives in unexpected places, protected by people who understand its value even when the mainstream world has moved on. Elena Vasquez was one of those guardians. Her grandmother, Carmen Vasquez, had learned the breathing techniques from Maria Santos during the Civil War years. Carmen had been a young woman then, working as a healer for Confederate forces in Texas, and she had witnessed Santos combine Bass's methods with traditional Mexican remedies to create horses that seemed almost supernatural in their endurance and intelligence. Carmen passed this knowledge to Elena with the solemn warning that it was sacred medicine that should never be commercialized or corrupted by greed. Elena's family ranch outside San Antonio became a quiet repository for techniques that the horse racing world had forgotten. 3 generations of Vasquez women maintained the breathing methods, the herbal treatments, and most importantly, the spiritual understanding that made the technique work. The Thompson family preserved different aspects of Bass's legacy. James Thompson had been one of the black ranchers in Oklahoma, who had received direct instruction from Bass during his years in Indian Territory. Thompson's family maintained detailed notes on heartbeat synchronization, TSTI, the advanced technique that allowed trainer and horse to achieve cardiac coherence during peak performance. The Thompson Ranch became a secret school where select individuals could learn what James called the old way of working with horses. Unlike the Vasquez family's focus on healing and gentling techniques, the Thompsons specialized in the performance applications that had made Bass's students legendary in the racing world. But the most tantalizing piece of the puzzle emerged in 1923, when historian Charles Weatherby led an expedition into the Big Bend region of Texas. Weatherby had been researching the life of Tom Bass for a planned biography when he encountered an elderly Comanche man named Joseph Running Bear, who claimed his grandfather had known Bass during his final years. According to Running Bear, Bass had lived among various indigenous communities throughout the Southwest after his disappearance, sharing his knowledge with tribal horse trainers who understood the spiritual dimensions of human-animal partnership. Running Bear led Weatherby's expedition to a cave system near the Rio Grande, where he claimed Bass had hidden his complete notes on the technique. The expedition did discover what appeared to be a cache of documents in the cave, including detailed drawings of horses and humans in various positions, extensive notes on breathing patterns, and what Weatherby described as diagrams that seemed to map the connection between human and equine nervous systems. Most intriguingly, they found what appeared to be Bass's personal journal, containing entries that dated up to 1908, 16 years after his supposed disappearance. But here's where the story takes a frustrating turn. Before Weatherby could have the documents authenticated by experts, the entire cache vanished. Some sources claim it was stolen by treasure hunters who thought the papers might contain information about hidden gold. Others suggest that surviving members of Bass's family reclaimed what they considered sacred knowledge that had never been meant for public consumption. Weatherby published a brief account of the discovery, but without the physical evidence, most historians dismissed his claims as wishful thinking or outright fabrication. The journal's disappearance became another layer of mystery surrounding Bass's legacy. For the next 70 years, fragments of the technique survived in scattered communities, each preserving different aspects of the original knowledge. Natural horsemanship movements of the late 20th century began rediscovering some of Bass's principles, though usually without understanding their source or their complete application. Then came the breakthrough that Bass himself probably never could have imagined. Modern science began proving that his 19th-century insights had been accurate all along. In 2018, researchers at Colorado State University published a study that validated the core principles of synchronized breathing between humans and horses. Using heart rate monitors and respiratory sensors, they demonstrated that when riders and horses achieved breathing synchronization, both species showed dramatic reductions in stress hormones, 60% decreases in cortisol levels that indicated profound relaxation even during intense physical activity. The endurance benefits were equally remarkable. Horses whose breathing synchronized with their riders showed 35% improvements in sustained performance compared to control groups. The horses could maintain higher speeds for longer periods while showing fewer signs of fatigue. The HeartMath Institute took this research even further, demonstrating that cardiac coherence between humans and horses created measurable improvements in both species' performance that exceeded what either could achieve independently. When human and equine heart rhythms synchronized, both showed enhanced focus, improved reaction times, and what researchers described as intuitive communication that allowed for coordination without visible signals. Was confirming what Tom Bass had discovered through careful observation and patient experimentation in 1852. Humans and horses could achieve states of connection that transcended normal training relationships. Today, fragments of Bass's technique influence Olympic equestrians who practice breathing exercises with their mounts, therapeutic riding programs that use synchronized breathing to help disabled riders achieve connection with horses, and natural horsemanship movements that emphasize partnership over dominance. But practitioners across all these disciplines admit they've recovered perhaps half of what Bass understood. The advanced techniques he demonstrated in Denver, the apparent telepathic communication, the instant connection with wild horses, the ability to guide animals through breathing patterns alone, remain beyond modern comprehension. The search continues, driven by tantalizing accounts from those who witnessed Bass's final demonstrations. Researchers comb through archives looking for lost journals or forgotten photographs. Anthropologists interview elderly members of indigenous communities whose ancestors might have known Bass during his wilderness years. Horse trainers experiment with breathing techniques, trying to rediscover the advanced applications that created almost supernatural partnerships. Every few years, someone claims to have found new evidence. A ranch in Montana reports discovering 19th-century documents in an old barn. A family in New Mexico produces photographs that allegedly show Bass training horses in 1910. Academic conferences dedicated to human-animal communication feature presentations about recovered Bass techniques that promise revolutionary breakthroughs. Most of these claims prove to be wishful thinking or outright fraud, but occasionally, something emerges that suggests the complete knowledge might still exist somewhere, waiting for the right person to rediscover it. The most compelling recent account comes from Dr. Sarah Chen, an equine veterinarian who spent 2 years in rural Mexico researching traditional healing methods. In a remote village in Chihuahua, Chen encountered an elderly woman named Isabella Santos, the great-granddaughter of Maria Santos, Bass's Civil War-era student. Isabella demonstrated what she called caballo respiración, horse breathing, with a traumatized rescue horse that had been considered untrainable. Using techniques that combined synchronized breathing with specific touch points and what appeared to be intuitive communication, Isabella transformed the animal's behavior within hours. When Chen asked Isabella to teach her the complete method, the elderly woman smiled and said, "The man who gave us this gift said it should only be shared with those who understand that horses are teachers, not tools. When you learn that lesson, the horses themselves will show you what you need to know." Chen has spent the last 5 years trying to understand what Isabella meant. She's documented improvements in her own work with traumatized horses, but admits she's still missing crucial elements that would allow her to achieve the level of connection that Bass demonstrated. And that's where we stand today. In veterinary schools and riding academies, in therapeutic programs and Olympic training facilities, people are rediscovering pieces of what a formerly enslaved stable hand figured out under a Missouri moon in 1852. Modern science has validated Bass's insights about the physiological benefits of synchronized breathing and cardiac coherence between species. Technology has confirmed that the connection he discovered is real, measurable, and repeatable. But the deepest secrets, amenio, the advanced techniques that allowed for what appeared to be telepathic communication between human and horse, remain lost somewhere in the vast American landscape where Tom Bass chose legend over legacy. Perhaps that's exactly how he wanted it. Perhaps he understood that some knowledge is too powerful to survive in a world that turns every discovery into a commodity. Perhaps he knew that the most profound connections between species can only be earned through patience, respect, and understanding that transcends any training method or commercial application. Or perhaps, in some remote canyon in Texas or New Mexico, an old man is still practicing the ancient partnership with horses that can read human thoughts and respond to intentions never spoken aloud. Perhaps the complete knowledge survives, waiting for a world wise enough to approach it with the reverence it deserves. The search continues, and somewhere in that search, in the patient work of people who understand that horses are teachers rather than tools, Tom Bass's greatest discovery lives on. The revelation that true partnership between species requires not domination, but the courage to breathe in rhythm with another living soul. The story ends where it began, with the simple act of breathing and the extraordinary connections that become possible when we learn to synchronize our rhythm with the magnificent animals that have carried human dreams across continents and through centuries. The secret is still out there. The question is whether we've learned enough to be worthy of finding it again.